Okay. Well, we can get started since it seems like we are now up and streaming on YouTube. So, welcome everybody. This is IPN's first public event, Psychedelics, an event aimed towards empowering emerging voices in the psychedelic space. And today we're doing our policy career panel, where we are joined by Robert Hoffman, Hadas Alterman, Scott Cecil, and Hannah Procell. So we're just gonna kind of get started with everyone giving a brief 1-2 minute introduction on who they are and what they do.
Okay, yeah, I'll start, sure. Hey, my name is Robert Hoffman. I am the U.S. Outreach and Policy Coordinator for Students for Sensible Drug Policy. There's a lot of overlap between IPN and SSDP, but we're an international network of young people working to end the war on drugs. We are in 32 countries at this point, I think 33 now, maybe got an extra chapter today, and across a little under 200 campuses and communities around the world. And what I do there is connect with about 70% of our US chapters. I help them recruit, help them figure out how to get set up, et cetera, do policy change, which we'll talk about in a bit, help run our social media, and do some of our federal policy stuff with our policy council and our policy council leadership team. So that's a bit about what I do, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit.
Hadas, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Hadas Alterman. I'm an attorney. I'm one of the 3 founding partners at Plant Medicine Law Group. We are a boutique law firm working in the psychedelic space as well as the cannabis space. I'm also one of the co-founders of Decriminalize Nature in New York City, as well as a founding board member of the Psychedelic Bar Association.
Awesome. Hannah, do you want to give your introduction?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Hannah Procell. I use she, her pronouns. I got started in the drug policy reform community when I was in college, repping SSDP here with my little mushroom shirt. I was the chapter leader at the New College of Florida, SSDP, and that was a whole journey that led me to work with SSDP after college. And now I work with DanceSafe, which is the largest online retailer of drug checking kits in the US. And I work particularly as their policy project coordinator. We are launching a new program that's tested advocacy, organizing to legalize drug checking kits. And that has fit seamlessly into the drug legalization movement and the psychedelic legalization movement, because we shouldn't be legalizing psychedelics or any drugs without also legalizing paraphernalia as well. So hello, everybody. Glad to be here today.
And last but not least, Scott.
Well, hey, thanks for having me. I'm Scott Cecil. My pronouns are he and him. I am a city council member in Mount Rainier, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. I also work for the Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition, doing legislative and programming work for them. I've been doing drug policy reform work for about 10 years and have participated in direct lobbying in, I'm not sure, maybe like 10 to 12 states, and have also done a lot of work at the federal level, and have worked for such organizations as the aforementioned Students for Sensible Drug Policy, the Minority Cannabis Business Association, the Drug Reform Coordination Network, and the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. So I've done a little bit of everything, and I'm happy to be here with you all today.
Great. So I guess I want to just kind of get us started off with what initially pulled you guys into wanting to do drug policy work recreationally as a volunteer effort, and what made you realize this is something you wanted to make a long-term career out of? And anyone can just kind of like kick it off, and you guys can go from there.
I'll start. I think everyone should probably bring the mood up from here, but I think unfortunately a lot of people are like myself, where I was interested in substance use and interested in that safety first approach, but I didn't really fully realize how important this movement was until I lost somebody to overdose. And so that was what really propelled me. It was my first semester in college, and I went to an SSDP regional conference where I met Cecil for the first time. I learned how to administer Narcan and save someone's life there. And then a month later, I had a friend pass away and die. And it was deeply traumatic for the whole community, and woke me up and made me realize that I want to be a stronger leader in this movement. So that's why I decided to keep rolling with SSDP. And ever since then, it's just been incredible meeting people all over the drug policy reform community.
I'll go. I was going to try to go last every time because I like to hear what everyone else says first, but I guess I'll participate. I'll be very brief. My story is one that unfortunately is all too common and is the catalyst for many people who end up joining the SSDP network, like myself and Hannah and Rob did. I experienced a drug arrest. And at the time, I found out after being arrested that it was a felony to have any amount of marijuana in the state that I lived in at the time, which was Arizona. So I was injected into the criminal justice system in a very messed up kind of way. And prior to that, I'm the child of a former federally incarcerated inmate. So I've always felt that the criminal justice system was bad. And I've seen firsthand starting, actually before I was even born, but starting from childhood, seeing the ways that impacted and really destroyed my family in a lot of ways. And so I always realized that the carceral system was bad, but it wasn't until I got involved in drug policy reform activism where I started connecting the dots at how housing justice and environmental justice and the criminal punishment system and the drug war and just so many other forms of oppression are all interconnected. And so the more I've learned, the more outraged I've become, but it's made me a better activist. And so the thing that keeps me part of this movement is realizing that it's actually part of a larger movement for justice because they're all interconnected. And that's what motivates me to keep doing this work and why I showed up to the Zoom meeting today.
I'll go next. I started my career working as an attorney in the cannabis industry in California, where it became very clear very quickly that although the movement to legalize recreational adult use cannabis was very, coalition based and very thoughtful and very grassroots, once Prop 64 got voted in by the voters of California, there was a major shift in who was participating, who had a seat at the table for policy conversations now that they were going to be translated into regulations changed. We saw a lot more corporate interest. We saw a lot more lobbyists. And the ability of people who had been most negatively impacted by cannabis prohibition, most negatively impacted by the war on drugs for all different kinds of reasons, whether, they had been victims of the carceral state or whether they had just, they'd been patients that didn't get access to the medicine they needed, or they were just people who wanted to smoke weed and couldn't. Those sort of like normal people and individuals and community groups fell to the wayside. And more, the corporate interests became the most powerful voices in every single room. And I saw this happen, and it was really sad and really disillusioning. And as someone that's been recreationally in the psychedelic space for a long time, I knew that I didn't want to see the same thing happen to psychedelics. And so when these conversations about decriminalization and legalization became more and more above ground, I felt like, it would be good to leverage the things I've learned in cannabis, plus my skill sets and my partner's skill sets as attorneys to help the businesses and the individuals that want to rise up and out of the underground and into the regulated market, do so in a way that gives them a little bit more level of a playing field as, the compasses of the world and whoever else.
So I'll go last. So I went to SUNY New Paltz in upstate New York. And something that I didn't know when I went there, it's about 20 minutes from Woodstock, so I was expecting somewhat of a shock from my dairy farm town in upstate New York. But something I didn't know was that in 2014, I believe, or 2013, the college had the #1 highest amount of drug arrests of any public college in the United States per capita. Most of that was marijuana, although I don't think people should be getting arrested for any drugs. And a very common thing I saw basically right when I got to New Paltz and through my time there was people getting harassed by the police and arrested for marijuana a lot. A good amount of my friends, if not a majority, have been either close to being arrested or arrested by police, like campus police, town police, etc., for marijuana. So I was part of a 7-year, 3-campaign attempt to change our school's 2-strike marijuana expulsion policy and our 1-strike other drug expulsion policy, which we were eventually able to change. The chapter after me was able to change with at least a good majority of the policy that I wrote for them to get passed through. So that's the main reason I joined. I think from there, I realized that ending the war on marijuana was not going to end the war on drugs, and more significantly, that trying to reduce marijuana arrests was not going to get rid of the trouble of things like police violence in my college town, for example, where I learned how to do at least one specific anti-police action that stormed our town board and said that a police violence incident in town was unacceptable, and we are going to be taking up your space if you're going to be allowing these police actions to continue, which formed itself into some different campaigns, but I was separate from that. So that's how I got involved. And then in Rhode Island, I stuck through a drug policy by trying to fight a drug-induced homicide law and working for, or trying to get a safe injection facility, among other things. And so now in DC, focusing a lot on defund MPD work, among other DC drug policy happenings, which I'll probably be able to talk about in a couple weeks, but are still in the works.
Nice. And so, yeah, you guys all come from a unique, you entered the drug space from a unique angle and are doing different work. And so I'm wondering if you could just speak to a little bit to students about what are the different career paths available within the very general realm of drug policy.
I'll start with sort of a pessimistic note and then.
Scott, your mic kind of cut off. I'm not sure if you're over the, yeah, maybe just try moving your arm or something. It just, yeah. Let's see. Scott, do you want to try again? I think if you unmute, it might work.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Cool.
I'm not sure what happened, but then I thought you were speaking, Rob, and anyway, I'm just going to keep going. So I'm going to start on a pessimistic note, and then everyone else will lift us back up, hopefully. So Hannah and Rob and I, well, Rob currently does, but Hannah and I also used to work for the national staff of Students for Sensible Drug Policy in Washington, D.C. And so we've had literally hundreds of conversations, if not more, with students that were about to graduate or recently had graduated that wanted to work in drug policy reform and came to us to ask for advice. And I think maybe they're better at the job than I was, but my most honest answer was there really aren't any jobs in drug policy reform. And I really felt like that was the case when I entered this realm back in 2010. And I think gradually over time that has changed. So that's no longer my answer. But I will say, I think one that is oft overlooked is the path that I took, which is as an elected official. I try not to use the turn of phrase at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, the people who write the laws are the ones that are lawmakers that are elected to public office. So I would encourage anyone who is, if you're struggling to find quote unquote a job, or you don't know what your career path is when it comes to drug policy reform, look at what offices are open in local elected offices there are in your area, whether it's your school board, whether it's town council or city council or your county commission. There's any number of things that you could run for and be somebody who is infusing justice around the area of drug policy reform into your policy making work. And just as a quick example, I live in a very small city, but I was able to, through organizing my own personal network, I was able to raise enough money that the incumbent just dropped out of the race. And so I was on the ballot unopposed. And the reason I tell that story is maybe a little bit of a humble brag, but mostly to say, if I can do that, you can do that as well. I had only lived in the town for a year and I still won over 90% of the vote because I was able to out-organize the incumbent to the fact where she just dropped out of the race. So I would encourage anyone, if you're struggling to find your career path, look to run for elected office at the local level. You can do the most change there.
Yeah, and similarly, I'd say that there is so many opportunities for you to make your own path. Not to give that as an excuse, but it's true. If you have a small organization that has 2 staff members that's local or state level, and they're doing direct action work, service work, direct community service work, and they're doing advocacy work, all with 1 or 2 people, show up for them, volunteer with them, be in community with them, and establish relationships with organizations that you admire. It's definitely a lot easier to do that when you're in community and you're local. It's a little bit more difficult to do that, to find and create these jobs in the era of COVID right now when we have so many more restrictions. But truly, I think that is the best advice I can give you, is that if you find something that you're particularly passionate about, but there's not an opening, an opportunity yet, stay committed, stay involved, and that will be that. But I also recommend moving to DC at some point in your life if you're really passionate about federal reform. I got involved with lobbying my elected officials when I was in high school, when I first visited DC for the first time, and it was such a transformative experience. And I'm so grateful I got to work for SSDP and live in DC and work as a federal advocacy organizer and help create coalitions and help pass laws and advocate. It was transformative. And I met so many people who worked for different nonprofit organizations that I had admired for years. I was like, oh my gosh, the Human Rights Watch, they're so amazing. I love them. and so I keep my eye on these organizations, and I also keep my eye on their job listings page.
I would also add that because you all, I presume, are in school, the policy landscape is going to change by the time you're actually looking for a job, especially if you're earlier on in your college career. So yes, run for elected office, support local organizations, all of that stuff is incredibly important. And I think everyone should do those things at least once in their life if they can. At the same time, you're all going to be graduating into a drug policy landscape that is very different than what today looks like. And we know that because if we think about what drug policy was as a whole in the United States on February 24th, 2020, it was a completely different picture. In the past year, we've seen so many different jurisdictions change up their laws or policies. We've seen Canada, we've seen the first legal use of psychedelics in a country in nearly half a century in Canada with terminally ill patients. We had our first psychedelic IPO listing on NASDAQ. Things are changing very, very quickly, and I wouldn't underestimate that. And I think one of the things that I would advise you to think about is, what is the world that you're trying to create through your advocacy, and what are the jobs that are going to be needed once that world is created? And fight for that world. Definitely don't just leave it to the people who are doing it already, but also you have to be thinking several steps ahead, because ideally we're not going to need the nonprofits that exist today. We're not going to need them tomorrow, because they're going to accomplish what they set out to accomplish. They're going to check the box. Yes, our mission was literally accomplished. And now the funding that goes into our coffers can go fund a different organization that's just getting started, a different issue that's just coming to light.
Yeah, I was really just going to say what Hannah already said. So I I just want to highlight that and say a +1, like make your own job. And if you're involved with an organization, ask, I mean, in the beginning, maybe how you could, if they have money to give you like 5 hours a week or something, or et cetera. But basically, yeah, stick with an organization that you like, volunteer with them, support them, and then ask for what you're looking for. And it's the worst thing they can say, no? Like, so consider it. Yeah. And you
to
have
bounce off of also what Hadas was just saying is, yes, the landscape will look so different, and the most immediate needs of people will still not be as addressed as they should be by Congress. And so while the war on drugs may be closer to being over by the time you graduate, the impact of policies that are the war on drugs on the federal level and the state level, the impact of those policies continues to hurt people and will continue to impact people for years to come. So, if you're passionate about policy change, there's still always components and pieces of these larger laws that stay in place. And so you have to stay persistent to clean out a house of all of these little barriers for people that have drug arrests and stuff like that. There's still going to be really important reforms to have been done, even after we legalize marijuana on the federal level and start to create automatic expungement. It's not going to take care of everything for everybody. And there's still so much more work to be done with other substances.
Yep. Yeah, I think we move on to the next question. That's pretty much
So
what I would say anyway.
Yeah, it seems like the future of the drug policy space seems like it's very very plastic, very malleable, and that students really are going to just have to be very adaptive and open-minded and finding like a career for themselves in that space. But I'm wondering what skills you guys have found very helpful to get to where you are right now, and what skills you think students should focus on cultivating before they're at that 5 years from now stage where they're already in a career, and what can they do to cultivate those skills that have helped you guys?
Build relationships over time. Treat the people who help you very well. Offer yourself up as a resource as much as you can whenever you can be helpful. One, because it's just the right and decent thing to do, but two, politics is almost entirely just about relationships. And you could arguably fundraising also, but fundraising is about relationships. So get great at that. I would also say learn to write effectively, clearly, persuasively. And if you want to change laws, you have to understand how the law works. So I'm not saying everyone needs to go to law school, but having a basic familiarity with like the legal framework in the United States, what various, how the laws in your particular jurisdiction where you want to work operate beyond just with respect to drug policy is very helpful.
Yeah, I would agree. Reading and writing is critical. If you have a writing center at your college or at your community and somewhere, utilize it. I cannot tell you how much of a beautiful writer I grew into over the course of my 4-year university experience, because I went and worked on my papers and learned how to deliver clearly. And that paid off extremely currently in my career now. But absolutely, relationships and communication is critical. The ability to tell a story, to capture somebody's interest and help them understand why they should care about this issue that they maybe have never really heard of or thought of. That is a powerful skill, to tell a story, to connect it to somebody who thinks that they may not have any connection to that story or to the person who you are there lobbying and advocating on behalf of. Absolutely encourage you to just practice speaking up and talking to strangers about things that you think are important. You will find it really difficult to communicate to complete strangers in a lobby meeting if you don't get comfortable talking to complete strangers in your community about stuff like that too. And, you know, start with people in your extended family and friends and family and stuff like that. But when I was in high school and I was involved in nonprofit organizations, I did street outreach, and that was critical for me developing my ability to speak so strongly. So I highly recommend jump first, fear later, and start talking. Practice.
Yeah, I would just add to that a bit. I think learning how to be persistent, especially in drug policy reform, is very important. I think in terms of what people see on the sort of outskirts or the sidelines of a drug policy reform change versus what's on the inside, and that's what I mean. Every issue basically is a lot of groundwork, a lot of discussions, even a lot of meetings, a lot of Zoom meetings at this point, or when it's across a scenario or whatever. But yeah, just making sure that you have your specific asks and demands, and making sure you have the people power to be able to continue to ask for them. And again, with relationships that are positive, that is a significant help. But I think that's something that I've learned, and I think that I would want others to be working on as well. In terms of anything else, I would say not letting politicians and campus officials, in this case, sideline you into waiting for your demands to happen, or siloing you into a research committee and waiting for 12 months. And you don't have to focus on building up your sort of organizational power right now. Let's just wait a year and see how this state's marijuana legalization goes. I mean, if we had waited for the results of Colorado from a 20-year span for other states to legalize, we definitely wouldn't be anywhere close to where we were now. So people are going to try to delay you, and you have to know that your demands are important, and you have to push them, or otherwise you're not going to get it.
Resilience and persistence. You got it right there. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. We also have a question from the audience. This one is specifically for Hadas, but you mentioned that corporations are now the ones with the biggest voices in policy. How does someone get involved in the psychedelic policy side of things at a county or state level? Is it worth it? Is it worth attending town hall meetings? Are there any resources where we can find more info?
Yes, getting involved at the local level in politics is always worth it. At the very least, you will learn something. You'll understand more about who's making decisions in the place where you live, and that's valuable. And at best, you can have an opportunity to really have your voice heard. Depending on where you live, it might be really easy to go up and talk during a city council meeting, or it might be something that's quite difficult and there's like some long wait list and you need to get there hours in advance to stand in line. But either way, find out who represents the district that you live in. Wherever you live, someone's your elected official, and that person's job is to listen to you talk and to do something about it if and when they can. And it's not as simple as going in there and making a demand. You have to have a good argument, and you have to have a good way of expressing it, and you have to have preferably some sort of either data or compelling anecdotal story to help prove your point. But don't underestimate the power of going in and bringing an issue to your elected's attention, because these people have a lot on their plates. They have a lot of different issues to attend to. Their constituents are constantly bringing questions, concerns, many complaints into their office. And so if you don't talk about the things that are important to you, there's a high likelihood that they're not going to know about them.
Yeah, can I just jump off that a little bit? Because I saw in this question, and I know it's for Hadas, but I'll just say a little bit on that. In regards to like, how does someone get involved in this? Like, is it attending town hall meetings, for example? I think like attending town hall meetings and getting sort of representative context is something that is maybe a bit after you've built some sort of, maybe not necessarily organization, but people that are agreeing with you and are working with you on what you want to do in terms of psychedelic policy reform. And I think the other thing is figuring out, in terms of the psychedelic policy you're looking for, like what is the issue and what demands am I going to look forward to do X, Y, and Z. So yeah, building up the like people you have first, I think is the number one thing to do. And then figuring out what levers of power you need to pull, if I'm gonna keep that metaphor going on, is a step after that.
That's well said. I think you're going to be most effective on any level of reform with stronger numbers and more validity, which is created through calling yourself a group, calling yourself a coalition, and not just calling yourself that, but organizing yourself as such. I'm not sure if we're going to get into talking about coalition building as much, so I won't go off on that, but I have quite a few things to say in terms of if anyone wants to talk about building power and organizing in that way.
Well, that actually would be a pretty good segue into that, because one of the next questions was, could you guys speak to the importance and significance of coalition building in policy work, and how does somebody even get those skills to do coalition building?
Yeah, I am really grateful for the experiences that I've said before in DC. I had the privilege of working with several different organizations and creating 2 different coalitions. We created a marijuana justice coalition, and that was the ACLU, Drug Policy Alliance, NORML, SSDP, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, just Human Rights Watch, like incredible justice-focused human rights organizations that were all aligning themselves with the commitment of legalizing marijuana on the federal level in a way that is very justice-centric and forward in that particular reconciliation, expunging records, providing equity opportunities in the emerging cannabis industry for people who've been impacted by the war on drugs. And that was such an incredible experience working with those groups. But how do you do it? You don't have to have a bunch of official names already getting together. It can just be individuals. We also created the Unlock Higher Education Coalition, which was established to restore Pell Grants to people who were incarcerated. And it was made up of individual formerly incarcerated people and a few organizations here and there. And we accomplished our mission. They just recently were able to get Pell Grants restored. And that was so powerful. That's where I take the most of my organizing and coalition building experience from. The meat of it is connecting with people who are directly impacted by this issue and who have something very powerful to share and say and communicate to elected officials, and helping them practice telling their story and facilitate, meeting elected officials. You have the power and the skills that you've gained in college and in your communities to email elected officials in their offices and set up meetings and learn. You can easily do that. That is absolutely something that you can navigate and learn and do completely on your own. It just takes the leadership and the commitment to bring people together, to set up those meetings, to be thorough and delegate, this person works on this issue area and this person works on this, and we all check in with each other and we keep each other going and we keep each other accountable. So it's very teamwork, team building. It definitely takes leadership and initiative to build out some of that power. But if you can do it effectively, then you have yourself a coalition. Individual people and organizers and organizations working together, calling themselves one thing. It is so much more legitimate and powerful in the eyes of an elected official for you to show up and say, we are the Psychedelic Legalization Coalition of Oklahoma, and we know that it's really important to heal our communities through the ability to seek psychedelic medicine. It's medicine and we want to legalize it. Having a defined mission and a vision, to some extent, having some structure and having some cohesion can really help you have the most impact. But I don't suggest building coalitions unless you are committed to really centering the voices of people who are most directly impacted by those issues, because that's, I think, the meat of it right there. It can be extremely healing and transformative for people who've been negatively impacted to engage in this work. And it's great for you to help them and encourage them and help train them with your own skills and your ability to share stories and learn how to pitch to an elected official. Y'all have a lot more communication skills than you give yourselves credit for, and so many people in the community still need that help and need that. So share those skills and share that and train other people on how to do that stuff.
I'd like to jump in on this one. Victor, I think in the second part of your question, you asked us to talk about how the folks watching today can learn about coalition building. And I am not fiercely partisan for either of the two major political parties, although I do think one is significantly worse than the other. They're both pretty terrible, in my opinion. Because of hyperpolarization in our politics, you can look at the effect of coalition building very easily because of the state of those two major political parties, though. The reason for that is one of them is based on coalition building, whereas the other is based on an orthodoxy that you either have to be for or against. And I'll let you decide for yourselves which one you think I'm describing with those two definitions. But the reason that one of the parties at this moment in time just won a very important and sweeping election is because their party is based on building broad coalitions of people with with different interests all coming together under one banner. And so I just wanted to, if you want to see what trying to get what you want without coalition building looks like, then you can look at that other political party right now and see the state of their politics, both internally and their effectiveness in terms of actually advancing policy. And you can stand that side by side with the other one. The problem is, in coalition building, not every coalition partner always has the same amount of institutional power. So this is the thing that makes the other political party also dysfunctional in many ways. I'm pretty sure that on January 20th, I didn't think we were going to get more kids in cages and still be talking about $15 minimum wage and still waiting for the $2,000 check. But yet here we are. So I'll just leave it at that. But pay attention to what's happening now for the next couple of years through to the next federal election cycle, because you'll see very closely what the absence of coalition building looks like and what coalitions look like when they succeed or fail, because I think we're going to see a mixture of both.
I'm going to pop my email in the chat. Please reach out to me if you want to learn more about coalition building. It's just hannah@dancesafe.org. For those of you who cannot see the chat or click on it or rewatching this, reach out to me and I'd be happy to have a phone call with you and talk to you about it and help guide you and be a support, a friend, an advisor. It's important to build power and build community. And if you don't do it intentionally, it doesn't go so well in the long run. You know, you can succeed without building power like that in community. But as someone who studied social movement theory in college, if you want to have successful movements, both socially and politically, you really have to be intentional about building those coalitions and building community. You know, coalition and community are pretty much the same thing, except coalitions have more defined vision and have a purpose that is stated. They're all collaborating and working together intentionally towards a goal, but they're interdependent with each other.
Yeah, I think the most difficult part about coalition, at least sort of, I mean, without being in it, is kind of its abstractness. I really think, and again, we're talking about relationships a lot, but coalition building is really just like talking to some people that care about what you're thinking about, and organizations that generally ally with what you're working on, and like bringing them in and conversing with them and having calls with them and talking about what you want to do. I mean, it's really like, that's what coalition building is. I thought it was some abstract thing that like these organizations with people that were 20 years older than I did when I was in college. But then Well, in Rhode Island, it was a lot easier to join, like while that drug policy sort of network was starting up. But then I realized like, oh, like this is it. It's just a bunch of people who care about the same stuff, like talking and figuring out strategy. And obviously I'm simplifying it a bit, but it's not that it's not that hard to try to figure out. So, and honestly, like in a lot of communities, there's probably already work that's going on that needs your support. I mean, there's so many different organizations and coalitions doing X and Y, but I mean, it's something that I bring up to my SSDP chapters is a lot. I mean, especially in a city with above 50,000 people, and definitely in counties with less, is like, there's probably stuff going on in your community already. And you can at least connect with them, and it's probably somewhat related to the war on drugs and racial justice and a variety of other justice issues that we should be considering. So just take a look, see what's out there, and then join it because they need you.
So another question that we have, and this one's like super career focused, so I think it's a great question for the panel. Specifically towards Hadas, having gone through the law school JD route, can you share any insight about state bar associations and law school admissions and how they might view students in psychedelic research, policy, or local chapter leadership?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before, so thank you. Well, I will tell you this. I got into law school and admitted to the State Bar of California while so when I got admitted to law school, there was a pending felony charge, which we eventually sued the Oakland Police Department, and our records were totally cleared and we were declared factually innocent. A lot of people got arrested at a protest and I was amongst them. Which is to say, it depends on where you apply to law school. I think that some schools will view whatever work you are passionately dedicated to as an asset, and some schools will view that as a liability. I went to Berkeley, so Berkeley loved that I got arrested at a protest and spent time in jail protesting home foreclosures in Oakland. Other law schools didn't like that, and I didn't go to them. So I think, don't be afraid to be yourself. What will get you the farthest is telling your authentic story. Just do it in an intelligent way, do it in a thoughtful way. With respect to the state bar, there's character and fitness, at least in California, and I'd imagine it's similar elsewhere. There's character and fitness evaluations that are done to make sure that you're not a psychopath, that they're admitting to practice law essentially, or you haven't done anything egregiously terrible. But being involved with advocacy of any kind is not going to be one of the things that prevents you from successfully getting admitted into the bar, at least not in California. And I would be really surprised if that were the case anywhere else. You don't want to do anything illegal. And if you are going to do something illegal, then you need to be able to talk about it in your application and explain why it happened. There are more specific rules than that. And you can ping me if you want me to tell you how to find them. I don't remember what they are because thankfully I haven't had to think about that in several years. But yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that I want to convey to you is don't let the fear of how other people are going to perceive your work as an advocate prevent you from being an advocate. I was just having a conversation with an incredible organizer who was I think she was the political director for Measure 109 in Oregon, the psilocybin therapy legalization initiative that passed. Her name's Charlotte Blocker, and she said something I thought was so cool. She was talking about being comfortable telling your story, and then she stopped herself and she said, no, you don't have to be comfortable. As an organizer, as an advocate, it's not about your comfort. It's about feeling that you're not alone and knowing that you're not alone and knowing that other people out there are going to resonate with your story if you can tell it authentically. And it won't be for everybody. And not every law school is going to love the fact that you're doing something potentially controversial. Not every law school wants law students that are going to go out there and change the laws. Maybe law school wants students that are going to learn how to be protectors of the status quo as opposed to shifters of it. But you don't want to be there anyways. So I'd say go for it.
Victor, can I add a quick thing real quick? Just as a personal anecdote. I love everything that you just said. And I just wanted to add that I kind of joked with myself when I got hired by or started working with the Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition last year, because I looked at my employment history for the last 8 to 10 years or so. And every single job I've ever had, it has the word drug or cannabis or psychedelic in the title of the organization. And so it's a very daunting feeling to submit a resume to any job when they're looking at your history and it says psychedelic, drug, and cannabis on every line. So I guess I have one now on the list that doesn't have those words in there, but I just wanted to say, like, don't be afraid to live in your truth. Like, I'm just going to be real. Are there going to be some opportunities where doors are shut in your face because of the work you're doing? Absolutely. But guess what? If you're watching this, chances, whether you have come from poverty or whether you're a woman or whether you're a person of color or from some other marginalized communities, you're used to having doors closed in your face all the time. That's not a new problem. So just live in your truth. And because guess what? What's controversial now, if you're one of the people doing that work, you're going to be viewed as a pioneer and a visionary in the future, and it'll be worth it in the long run.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that. And I also just want to say, if you feel like for whatever reason, maybe you're first generation, maybe you have, unresolved issues that you personally need to work with before you can put yourself out there. If you feel like you need to gain some amount of stability in your life before putting yourself out there as someone that's going to have, psychedelic and drugs all over their resume or their law school application, that's okay. You can go down a conventional route. If you have bills to pay and you can't afford to live off of, a nonprofit salary or student salary, that's okay. It's not something everyone can do. It's not something everyone can do all the time. And sometimes you need to really think about what self-care means to you and make sure you're in a place where you're stable and definitely, safe in order for you to then go out and take those risks, because they are risks. And like, I completely agree with Scott that it's great to live in your truth and it's rewarding and it's something that I really think we all deserve to be able to do, but realistically, it's not always possible. And I guess I just want to make clear, like, there's no shame in needing to do something that's a little bit less exciting and glamorous if you still need to be on that path. And anyone that judges you for that or thinks that you're not down or not really committed to the movement doesn't know, they don't know your intentions and they don't know your truth and they don't matter.
Well said. I just want to add at the end, I'll be brief. Don't underestimate your ability to reframe or to just frame your experience, your passions in a way that is going to appeal to whatever audience you have. That's where my writing encouragements really come in, because it is a piece of cake once you get the hang of it, to just frame all of these issues as the public health and safety issues that they are. We see this as a part of a societal issue that needs to be healed through that public health approach, through that public safety approach, through that justice approach. And so, especially when it comes to law school, that's what law is all about, what's just and right. And that evolves over time. And so, we are at the forefront we are the first people in many, many years to talk about drug use as something that is healing, something that is transformative for a community, can be empowering, and all those things. And so I don't underestimate your ability to frame that, because you can change someone's mind and impress them and challenge them just by reading your application and thinking, oh my God, I've never thought about how negatively this whole thing impacts the world, and look at this person who sees it this way. So that opportunity of being scared to put yourself forward could be an opportunity to change someone's mind and make a really great impression.
That's great. That's great advice, guys. So I have about like time for two more questions. One of them is the next question ties in a little bit to what you guys were saying about coalition building and building community, building connections. So, do you think that student activists should be super laser focused in on only drug policy, or do you think they should kind of balance it with issues that are kind of tangential to grow their network? So, as an example, if there's like an effort to address gerrymandering in your state, and you are part of the cannabis legalization, group in Texas, do you think that activists should also try to kind of like dabble in these other spaces that are tangential to their efforts?
100%. You need to be as intersectional as possible with as many different communities and issue groups as you can without overextending yourself or overcommitting. So if you are able to manage your priorities well, then get involved with as many different interest groups as you can. It will help in the long run. It will make a difference. It is part of building that community, that network. But inherently, all of these different psychedelic reform, other drug policy reform, and other drug policy issues, they are so intertwined and interdependent. So it would be ridiculous to not cross into some of these and to acknowledge, like, wow, the houseless community in my area is also really struggling with a Hep C outbreak. I'm really focused on the psychedelic legalization stuff, but maybe I can use my resources to redirect some funding to the local syringe exchange. Like, what can you do to get involved and to create those connections and really understand that I think this is so critical for advocates to get. So I just wanted to pause to like get what I was going to say perfectly, but we can push on to legalize marijuana, to legalize psychedelics, to legalize all drugs. We can push on towards these goalposts in any direction we want, but we're not going to see a transformed society in the future just by focusing on one thing. So I think that can be detrimental to only focus too much on one thing, because otherwise we're not creating the new communities, the new environments, the new organizers, the new advocates. We're not creating that larger community and building power as people that are not the 1%. We're not building our power in the most effective way if we stay too focused on one thing. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, it's really hard to laser focus in terms of drug policy reform when it's sort of so spread out into a number of issues. I just had a call, I think about an hour before this one, with a person trying to start a chapter of SSDP at University of Vermont. And she was like, okay, well, what does a typical chapter focus on? And I was like, well, you have about 20 options. You could do psychedelic policy stuff, marijuana legalization, drug decrim, drug defelonization, reducing penalties, getting a Good Samaritan policy, naloxone access, et cetera. So, I mean, these issues are directly connected to other issues because of how the war on drugs started, right? Like the laws against opium use in California, for example, specifically targeting Chinese people and other Asian American groups. And then marijuana laws. I think we all at this point know why marijuana laws were started in the United States and why cannabis was called marijuana originally in the United States. I mean, the war on drugs is a racial justice issue. So, I mean, it automatically is going to go into other issues. Otherwise, I don't think you would have a good enough understanding of the war on drugs to see why it's actually in effect and how you need to end it. So I think it's definitely important to reach out to different groups to figure out your coalition. I would say in terms of figuring out your specific like targets or people you want to be in coalition with, I think as long as you're able to figure out in your mind like how your issues are connected together, then I think it's a good fit, right? Like if you see a sort of issue group and you can sort of see how it's somewhat connected to at least a facet of something you're trying to fight against by ending the war on drugs, like then you can connect with them. And then if you can't, if it seems like totally sort of separated, then it might not be at least a target for coalition, although you're going to need their support in the future if you want a sort of majority to pass what you're trying to pass or get what you're trying to get.
Hadas, I would love to hear your thought on this, particularly with the success of the legalization of psychedelic initiatives over this past year and the momentum that's been building. For me as an organizer, there's a little bit of fear that people who use more stigmatized substances will be left behind and will continue to be targeted and arrested and put in jail where they die of overdose or withdraw, stuff because they're in jail. That happens here in my city all the time. So what do you think about that? Because I feel like this is a relevant time to bring this up, because there's so many organizers who are so passionate about the psychedelic legalization stuff, but I'm scared. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, no, I hear you. And it is scary. And I think what I try to do on an interpersonal level is ask people and try to get a sense of what is the greater framework that you're coming at this decriminalization from. And for some people, they're coming really from a mental health perspective, and they're thinking about the science, and they're thinking about therapy. And they're thinking about, rewiring neural pathways and things like that. And then for other people, they are coming from a very corporate investment-minded approach. And I don't always know how to reach people like that. I will say, the times when I actively feel like I need to step in and compassionately question where someone is coming from the most is when people use the war on drugs framework to address psychedelic decriminalization, because I actually think that those are two completely different issues. From a policy perspective, I think theoretically and culturally, like, it's all sort of jumbled. But when you look at the numbers, when you look at the data, we're not seeing a disproportionate number of arrests involving psychedelics. I don't think anyone should ever go to jail for a day, for a second, for an hour for using any kind of drug. But that's not really the driving argument behind why all this psychedelic change needs to happen. And so I do take issue when people try to operationalize all of the momentum behind ending the war on drugs in the name of psychedelics, because I don't think that they are related at the most nuanced level. And I also don't think that it's fair, because I think that there's enough arguments for why psychedelics should be decriminalized without sort of like leeching off of all of the war on drugs energy. So there's that. And then I also think, again, for me, it really comes back to frameworks and what are we saying? What are we saying? What's like the silent part when we're talking about psychedelics? What's the part we're not saying out loud? And I think that for a lot of people, the part we're not saying out loud is that there's good drugs and there's bad drugs, or there's good drug users and there's bad drug users. And I think that those assumptions are problematic. I will also say that not all drugs are the same. Not all drugs have the same effects. Not all drugs are, they're just at a very literal chemical level, they are not all the same. And I think it's okay to have nuanced, thoughtful conversations about how each grouping or each individual substance ought to be treated under the law and ought to be treated, culturally. Again, what is not okay is stigma. What's not okay is shame. What is not okay is sort of this race-based preference for which drugs are okay and which drugs are still going to be criminalized. And I think what it comes down to for me is, I think what Scott said about our two parties was really smart. I don't think our government is very good at doing anything. Like, tell me what the speed limit is, and otherwise pretty much like leave me alone. Because as we've seen in the past couple of years, like they just lie to us all the time, and they especially lie to us when it comes to drugs. And so I think what I want is I want to see access to a safe supply for drugs. I want to see less fentanyl out there killing people when they don't know that they're taking it and they haven't consented to taking fentanyl. I want to see these greater harm reduction policy pieces sort of snuck in under the momentum of psychedelics. You know, like psychedelics has a lot of energy right now. There's a lot of money behind it. It's very sexy. Policy makers are really open to it. So like, okay, let's decriminalize psychedelics in California. But in that same bill, let's also decriminalize testing drugs regardless of what the drugs are. I think that's how we get it done.
Absolutely. That's definitely what DanceSafe is trying to do, is hop onto that train of like, oh, okay, states are ready to legalize all drugs. Okay, well, we're going to carve out something that allows the state to not only legalize drug checking fentanyl test strips, but maybe provide them to the local health department so that they can distribute them, maybe even provide drug checking so that they can keep tabs on the safety of their community. Thank you so much for speaking to that. That was really helpful of a distinction to not blend those two worlds as much, because I think that has always been a place of tension for me. But certainly I think that there very much are very different conversations.
Sweet. Great. Well, I'll just close off with this question. It's more just like closing thoughts from you guys, but alternatively, you know, I don't think it'd be truly a panel for students without some homework. So I'm wondering if you guys have any podcasts or books or something that you want to kind of leave as a something for somebody to go and explore after this is over.
Yeah, I have an organization that people should explore. I don't know about Hadas, but I know that every single other person on this call, including Victor and Luke behind the IPN logo, are either SSDP members or alumni. So if you're interested in joining Students for Sensible Drug Policy, you should email me at robert@ssdp.org, and I can help you facilitate that, or maybe help you join a chapter. That's pretty much all I got. Like, I don't have a Twitter or an Instagram, but we're on SSDP official or at SSDP on Facebook.
Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, what the new science of psychedelics teaches us about consciousness, dying, addiction, depression, and transcendence. Really great book to absorb. It will help you better articulate this knowledge to people in your immediate community. Definitely learn to synthesize these ideas into smaller bite-sized pitches and information so that you can learn to change other people's minds about psychedelics and other drugs. So I definitely recommend that book. A few other books, I would definitely say please stay subscribed on your email list to as many different action groups that are doing contacting elected official campaigns. You want to make sure you have those action alerts in your email or over phone. Like, let that be the one thing that you subscribe to on your phone text message is like, action alert, we need you to sign this petition, to contact your elected official. That can be really impactful. And learn about forms of organizing. Learn about social movements. You know, study a little bit about sociology culturally and how, you know, humans are where we are. I think integrating some of that information can be really helpful in navigating this field.
I would say, I mean, there's so many things, so I'll just give you one to focus on. Learn about Ibogaine and support, you know, go out there and find organizations that are advocating for legal Ibogaine research and legitimizing Ibogaine as a possible solution for people who are experiencing problematic opiate use for themselves, because it blows my, I think I talk to someone every single day that has someone who they love that's suffering as a result of their opiate use, and has been trying to change their use patterns and has not been able to. And it makes me so sad that people don't know what Ibogaine is. It makes me so sad that people don't have access to Ibogaine or safe, reliable access to Ibogaine. So what is it? Yeah, IRI Institute. I'll just drop it in the chat. Ibogaine Research Institute is a good one.
I'll leave a nugget of wisdom, a podcast recommendation, and then just a closing thought. So, nugget of wisdom, I pride myself on being, even though I'm in a tiny little city that no one's ever heard of and no one cares what I think anyway, I like to be very open about the fact that I use drugs, including psychedelics on certain occasions. And I think that makes me better at my job, including being a better elected official. And I've decided to be open about that. So we'll see how that goes. But the nugget of wisdom is as follows. If you love psychedelics as much as I do, or even if you're just curious about them, I would simply suggest to you that psychedelics can't save the world, contrary to what you might have heard. People have to do that. But the good news is that psychedelics can, when used intentionally, can lead to healthier people, which gives us a better shot at saving our world, which really is quite urgently in need of people stepping up to the plate to avoid global catastrophe. A podcast recommendation: I actually host 2 podcasts, The Outlaw Report, your source for credible cannabis news, and a podcast called Prohibited about various forms of prohibition. We have a bunch of episodes about psychedelics on there. So just email me at prohibitedpodcast.com@gmail.com, or just go to prohibitedpodcast.com and you can find those. Actually, I have an episode dropping in the next 24 hours, so go check that out. And then I just wanted to say quickly too, because you asked for homework, Victor. Homework that you can do is just make sure that you understand, make sure that you've actually read Oregon's drug decriminalization law. Make sure that you've actually read the Decrim Nature municipal ordinances that have happened, because nobody has legalized psychedelics in the last year. It's not correct to say that. What they have done is a form of decriminalization called lowest law enforcement priority legislation, which simply says enforcing this law is the lowest priority for our police department. That is not ending drug prohibition. That didn't change any drug prohibition laws. It didn't make Black people feel, it didn't make it so that me and people that look like me don't have to wonder if today is going to be the day that a police officer is going to randomly murder us every time we leave our houses. It didn't end racial profiling. And so I just want to say that ending drug prohibition looks a lot different than that. And what we're doing right now, while I am excited by it and I support it and I welcome it, lowest law enforcement priority is what we used to do with marijuana back in the 1970s and the 1980s, before any states legalized it or even decriminalized it for that matter. Actually, a few did it in the 70s. But the point is, if that's where psychedelics is right now, and that means psychedelics is going to take a similar path that cannabis took, then I don't want any part of that, because that's not undoing capitalism, and it's not undoing any of these other oppressive systems that we still have to live under. So am I saying don't support the local Decrim Nature campaign? Absolutely not. You should totally support it, and I wish them all the best of luck, and indeed I'm involved with them in several cities trying to help them with their work. But that is not legalization, and it's not ending drug prohibition, and we should be very clear about what that means for where we're headed when it comes to psychedelics. Because if psychedelics means we're going to have an exclusive, hyper-capitalistic industry where a bunch of millionaires are going to make more millions like the cannabis industry looks in most places, I want no part of it. So let's make sure that's not the path we're headed down with psychedelics or any other substance.
Thank you, Scott, always leaving us with the strong thoughts. Yes. My last nugget is this. If you're going to be an organizer, if you're going to be a lifelong advocate, prepare yourself for a lifelong journey. Don't expect to receive catharsis and success within the first 3 years. You're going to have wins. And so you need to learn to celebrate. If you're going to do this work, do it in a way that is joyous. Organize your communities and your coalitions in a way that is fun, in a way that makes you happy and feel supported. Don't carry everything on your back. Work together. Prepare yourself for the long haul and organize in a way that feels exciting, that feels joyful. And that's my best advice. I think we'd all be better organizers if we focused on that too.
Awesome, guys. Well, this was a great panel. I'm sure everybody is going to be able to benefit from all the wisdom and experience you guys shared here today. And thank you guys so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Have a good rest of your day, guys.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.